Emily stood in the hallway of the house that had once felt like a sanctuary. The walls were still lined with family portraits and mahogany shelf her father had loved to polish himself on Sunday mornings, but everything else felt colder now. It had only been 3 months since his funeral, and though the shock had dulled, a quiet weight still sat in her chest like a constant reminder of unfinished conversations and unspoken goodbyes. She hadn't wanted to come back to this house, not with Cynthia still living in it, but the lawyer's recommendation to stay until probate cleared made practical sense. She had only brought a couple of suitcases and her laptop. Emily didn't plan to stay long. The house wasn't hers, not officially. It was in Cynthia's name now, thanks to a shared mortgage her father and stepmother had refinanced together just 2 years before he died. Emily, meanwhile, was the named beneficiary of a modest inheritance, an old life insurance policy, a locked investment account, and a handful of personal items outlined in the will. The most valuable among them, both emotionally and financially, was a 1950s oil painting passed down from her grandmother, a foggy seaside landscape in thick brushstrokes, done by a relatively obscure artist who had become collectible after his death. For years, the painting had hung in her father's study. He used to joke that the man in the painting looked like he was waiting for the tide to turn, just like he did every year during tax season. Emily always laughed. It was part of their quiet tradition. Tea in the study, slow classical music from his old stereo, the two of them talking about everything and nothing. Now, as she stepped into that same study on a quiet Thursday morning to look for an old photograph album, her heart skipped a beat. The wall above the reading chair was bare. She blinked, wondering if she had simply misremembered. She turned a slow circle in the room, scanning every surface. The bookcases were still full. The antique desk still had her father's fountain pens in their wooden box. The tiny porcelain lighthouse on the window ledge remained untouched. But her painting, was gone. Emily left the room and walked down the hallway to the kitchen, where Cynthia was stirring cream into her coffee. The smell of hazelnut creamer always made Emily nauseous, but she stayed composed. "Hey," Emily said casually, "did you move the painting from Dad's study?" Cynthia glanced at her over the rim of her mug. "Which one?" "The one over the chair, the seascape. Grandma's painting." "Oh," Cynthia said, and then she shrugged, as though the memory had just returned. "I sent it out to get cleaned. It was looking a little faded." Emily's brows furrowed. "Cleaned? By who?" "A gallery friend of mine. You wouldn't know them." She said it too quickly, dismissively. Emily noted the tone. She had grown up knowing how Cynthia operated, slick, polite, and always 2 sentences ahead of any confrontation. But this was different. Her father's will had clearly listed that painting as part of Emily's inheritance. Any alteration, transfer, or relocation should have been communicated to the estate's executor first. Cynthia didn't have the authority to just loan it out. Something tightened in Emily's gut. She didn't argue. She thanked Cynthia, grabbed her phone, and walked back up the stairs. In her old bedroom, now a guest room, she opened the desk drawer and pulled out a folder she had brought with her from her apartment in Boston. Inside were copies of the will, the trust agreement, and a handwritten inventory of the items assigned to her. The painting was the 3rd item on the list, listed as Seaside Landscape by R.H. Boley, appraised $43,000 in 2020. A separate note had been added to the margin by the executor, Mr. Halverson, indicating that the item was to be transferred in full upon probate completion or interim storage approved by beneficiary. There had been no such request for approval. Emily tapped her fingers on the desk, staring at the document. She had been too distracted with funeral arrangements and her thesis defense at law school to worry about her inheritance. She trusted Cynthia to follow the rules, even if they weren't close. But now something wasn't sitting right. She emailed Mr. Halverson immediately, simply stating, "The painting from the study is no longer in the house." Cynthia said she sent it to a gallery for cleaning. "Were you informed?" She didn't receive a reply until the next morning. "No, I was not informed. That item is still technically under restricted probate status. I'll need to investigate. Do not allow further items to be removed from the premises until I follow up." Emily's heart pounded as she read the message. This wasn't just a family miscommunication. It was a legal breach. Later that afternoon, Cynthia left for her Pilates class, and Emily seized the opportunity to snoop. She didn't feel good about it, but this wasn't just about curiosity. It was about protecting something her father had intended to leave her, something meaningful. She started in the home office, checking the trash folder on Cynthia's laptop. Nothing. Then, in the kitchen drawer behind a stack of junk mail, she found a receipt folded in half. It was from Haverstock Gallery, a boutique private art dealer downtown. The line item read, "One original R.H. Boley painting, sold for private collection. Transfer complete. £48,000. The date was from 10 days ago. Emily stared at it. Her lungs felt tight. She flipped the receipt over. On the back was a printed business card from a man named Simon Halberd, listed as a private collector liaison. Emily snapped a photo with her phone and returned everything exactly as she had found it. Her mind was racing. She knew enough contract law to understand what had happened. Cynthia had illegally sold the painting before the estate was fully settled. It didn't matter if Cynthia was the surviving spouse. The trust clearly protected certain assets for Emily, and that included this painting. And if Cynthia had used the money for personal use, that would qualify as misappropriation. She didn't say anything to Cynthia that evening. Instead, she emailed Halverson the photo of the receipt and the gallery card, and then she began drafting a letter, formally requesting an immediate injunction against further asset transfers and a financial review of all recent transactions involving the estate. She stayed up late, staring out the window, unable to shake the feeling that she had only scratched the surface of something bigger. The next morning, Tyler pulled into the driveway in a shiny new BMW, the dealership tags still taped to the window. And suddenly, everything made a terrible kind of sense. Emily watched from her bedroom window as Tyler stepped out of his gleaming new BMW, stretching like he had just returned from some glorious adventure. The car glinted obnoxiously in the afternoon sun, its showroom sheen practically screaming the price tag. He reached into the driver's seat, pulled out his phone, and snapped a selfie with the vehicle behind him, posing like a teenage influencer who believed the world owed him applause. It was almost too ridiculous to be true. Emily had never liked Tyler. He was immature, entitled, and had always treated her with subtle disdain, even before their father's death. He was the kind of person who never said thank you unless it benefited him. And now, standing in the driveway, with a £48,000 car likely purchased with the proceeds from her stolen inheritance, he had become the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong in her father's absence. She didn't confront him. Not yet. She needed something more, something she could take to court if this escalated. Because now she knew it would. After locking the bedroom door behind her, Emily opened her laptop and pulled up the scanned copy of her father's will and the corresponding testamentary trust documents. She had reviewed them briefly before, but now she read each line with fresh eyes, this time as a legal investigator, not a grieving daughter. The trust, which had been drafted 2 years before his death, clearly separated Cynthia's assets from Emily's inheritance. Her father had been meticulous. The painting, along with a collection of antique books, a bond account, and a small safe deposit box, were listed under Emily's name, held in trust by the executor until probate concluded. It also included a strict clause. Assets listed under the designated beneficiary are to be held, maintained, and protected during the probate period. No sales, transfers, loans, or modifications shall occur without express written consent from both the executor and the beneficiary. That clause alone was enough to make what Cynthia did not just unethical, but illegal. Emily typed up a timeline, labeling key events, the date of her father's death, the appointment of the executor, the date Cynthia claimed the painting had been sent for cleaning, the date on the gallery receipt, and finally, Tyler's BMW delivery. When viewed together, it was devastatingly clear. Cynthia had waited just long enough for Emily to be overwhelmed with funeral logistics and graduate school responsibilities, and then, without permission, sold the painting for cash and used it for personal gain. Still, Emily didn't want to jump to accusations before understanding the full scope. She called Mr. Halverson later that afternoon, requesting a meeting. They agreed to meet in his office downtown the following morning. She barely slept that night, running scenarios in her head, trying to anticipate what defenses Cynthia might raise and how the courts would view the trust enforcement clause. At 9:30 a.m. sharp, Emily entered the quiet lobby of Halverson Marks, a boutique estate law firm where her father had been a client for over a decade. Mr. Halverson, a white-haired man in his 70s with soft eyes and a firm voice, greeted her in his corner office. He gestured toward a leather chair across from his desk. "You did the right thing, calling me," he said after she had explained everything. Cynthia had no authority to sell that painting. "I'll be issuing a formal cease and desist letter this afternoon, and we'll begin procedures to recover the funds." "Can she claim she didn't understand the clause?" Emily asked. He folded his hands. "Ignorance is not a defense when it comes to fiduciary responsibility." Cynthia was aware of the trust. She signed acknowledgement documents when your father updated his will. She even received a summary of the trust's obligations. "What happens now?" "We'll notify the gallery and the buyer. The buyer likely acted in good faith, but the sale can be contested. Ideally, we recover the painting. If that's not possible, she owes you the full market value." He paused, then added, "and possibly more." Emily exhaled slowly, feeling the beginning of relief, but also anger that it had come to this. It wasn't about the money. It was about the betrayal. Her father had trusted Cynthia to respect his wishes, and she had ignored them the moment it suited her convenience. When she returned home that afternoon, Cynthia was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her tablet. She didn't look up. "Tyler's car looks expensive," Emily said lightly as she poured herself a glass of water. "It was a graduation gift," Cynthia replied without emotion. "He's worked hard. He deserves it." Emily didn't respond. She walked past her, up the stairs, and into the guest room, where she closed the door again. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her email. As promised, Halverson had already sent a copy of the cease and desist letter to Cynthia, the gallery, and Simon Halbert, the art collector. The email included a firm note demanding the immediate return of the painting or the equivalent compensation to Emily within 10 business days. 2 hours later, Cynthia knocked on her door. "I just got an email from Halverson," she said curtly. Emily opened the door halfway. "I know. I asked him to send it." Her stepmother's face twisted. "You had no right to go behind my back. That painting was part of this house. I made sure it went to someone who'd appreciate it, instead of sitting in storage." "You had no legal authority," Emily said. Her voice was calm, but steel edged each word. "It was mine. You sold it to buy Tyler a car." Cynthia narrowed her eyes. "You think this little tantrum of yours is going to undo what's been done?" "It's not a tantrum," Emily said. "It's called enforcing the law." She shut the door in Cynthia's face and locked it. That evening, Cynthia didn't cook dinner. She stayed in her room. Tyler didn't even say hello when he came home. Emily didn't care. She spent the night reading through case law, reinforcing her understanding of fiduciary negligence. She knew Cynthia would try to wriggle out with claims of family entitlement or emotional stress, but the courts didn't reward theft cloaked in sentiment. The next morning, Halverson called. "The gallery has confirmed the sale. The collector is refusing to return the piece unless compelled by court order, but they are willing to mediate if necessary." "What about Cynthia?" "She emailed me a brief response last night. Denies wrongdoing, says she believed the asset was hers. She's bluffing." "What happens next?" "We begin formal proceedings. I'll file for injunctive relief, and then we'll initiate a financial audit. If we can prove she diverted other assets, we'll seek damages." Emily hung up and stared out the window. The BMW was gone, Tyler likely out showing off. The house felt heavier now, not because it was falling apart, but because it was full of deceit. Every corner, every hallway she used to love, now felt compromised. And yet, beneath her pain, a slow but unmistakable sense of control was returning. For the first time in weeks, Emily knew exactly what she had to do. Not just to get the painting back, but to ensure that Cynthia never got the chance to rewrite her father's legacy again. She opened a new document on her computer and began to write her own legal statement, outlining everything in her own words, starting from the funeral day until the moment Tyler drove up the driveway. She titled the file, inheritance misappropriation, the case against Cynthia Mallory. And she wasn't going to stop until justice was served. By the end of the week, Cynthia stopped pretending everything was fine. The house shifted from icy politeness to outright tension. Doors were slammed more often, conversations were reduced to monosyllables, and meals were taken in silence, when they were taken at all. Emily had begun keeping snacks in her room to avoid the kitchen altogether. She could feel the storm brewing in every creak of the hallway, and every glance Cynthia shot her way. Tyler, oblivious to the legal undertow in the house, continued showing off his new car to friends and posting it on social media. Emily didn't need to follow him. Her friends from high school, some still local, had begun sending her screenshots. He had captioned one which she said, "I'd never get anything nice. Look at me now." The sheer arrogance lit a fire inside her. He had no idea he was gloating over stolen property. But Emily wasn't just seething. She was building a case. Every evening, she reviewed trust law precedents, especially cases involving misuse of estate property during probate. It wasn't uncommon for spouses to misunderstand inheritance clauses, but Cynthia hadn't misunderstood. She had deliberately bypassed every safeguard. That mattered. Meanwhile, Mr. Halverson had escalated the situation with official court filings. Cynthia was served with an injunction preventing her from selling or moving any other estate assets. The gallery had acknowledged receipt of the painting and confirmed its sale to Simon Halbert, a well-known private collector with a reputation for discretion and an aversion to court drama. Halverson had suggested mediation, hoping to avoid dragging Halbert into court, which might prolong the return of either the painting or the funds. But it was Cynthia's written reply to the legal complaint that truly set things in motion. She claimed the painting had hung in a shared marital space and therefore was reasonably assumed to be community property. She alleged that Emily had never expressed attachment to the item and that the funds from its sale had been used for family support purposes. The arrogance of her argument shocked even Halverson. "She's bluffing and hoping the court will side with her as the grieving widow," he told Emily during one of their strategy calls. But her claims fall apart the moment we look at the trust clause. And that clause, Emily knew, was their weapon. Her father had anticipated this. The clause was unambiguous. The painting was placed in a testamentary trust as a personal inheritance to Emily, separate from all jointly owned property. It was designated as her exclusive asset, to be held in safekeeping until the conclusion of probate. Cynthia had signed an acknowledgement of the trust structure, a document that Halverson now had on record. Emily's role shifted from passive beneficiary to active participant in the legal process. With Halverson's help, she prepared a sworn affidavit detailing the events leading up to the sale, her discovery of the receipt, and her conversations with Cynthia. She attached screenshots of Tyler's social media posts as supplemental proof of where the funds had gone. Then she reviewed the original trust acknowledgement signed by Cynthia and added it to the evidence packet. The next step was a court appearance, not a full trial yet, but an evidentiary hearing to determine if the painting or its equivalent value should be immediately restored to Emily while the full matter proceeded. Cynthia showed up with her lawyer, a sharp-suited woman who tried to downplay the violation by painting Emily as an overzealous stepdaughter trying to punish her grieving stepmother. But Halverson remained calm and precise. He presented the trust clause, Cynthia's signed acknowledgement, the receipt from Haverstock Gallery, and a breakdown of the vehicle's purchase timeline, all documented, all irrefutable. Then came the final blow, a statement from the gallery itself, confirming that Cynthia had not only sold the painting without the executor's approval, but had also asked that the transaction remain discreet and untraceable. The judge didn't take long to issue a preliminary ruling. He ordered Cynthia to either facilitate the return of the painting or pay Emily the full value assessed by the gallery, pound 48,000, within 15 days. Additionally, the court froze the rest of the estate's pending assets to prevent further unauthorized actions. Outside the courtroom, Cynthia didn't speak to Emily. She brushed past her with tight lips and red eyes, her lawyer trailing behind. Emily remained standing, her hands slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally being heard. She had come into this house assuming she'd quietly wait for the estate to resolve. She had never expected to go to court. But now that she had, something inside her had changed. She returned home that evening and passed Cynthia in the hallway. The woman didn't look at her, just muttered, "You've destroyed this family." Emily didn't reply. She didn't need to. Cynthia had destroyed everything the moment she violated the trust. Family wasn't about blood or marriage certificates. It was about respect, boundaries, and honoring a man's last wishes. Emily was simply doing what her father had hoped someone would do: protect what mattered. The next few days passed in tense silence. Cynthia stayed mostly in her room. Tyler, less boastful now, seemed to sense that something was unraveling. Emily avoided them both, throwing herself into research and quiet planning. She didn't want revenge. She wanted closure. Then, on the 9th day after the ruling, Emily received a package delivered by courier. Inside was a certified check made out to her in the amount of £48,000, issued through Cynthia's attorney's office. A short note accompanied it. Payment issued under protest. This matter is not over. Emily stared at the letter for a long time. The money meant the court had enforced her right, but it didn't erase the betrayal. And it didn't bring the painting back. Later that evening, she stood in her father's study, gazing at the blank wall where the painting had once hung. The empty space held a kind of quiet echo. She could almost hear her father's voice saying, "Some tides take longer to turn, but they always do." She took out her phone and snapped a picture of the bare wall. Then she pulled out a print copy of the court order, placed it on the desk beside a copy of the check, and sat down. For now, she had won the battle. But the war over her father's legacy, over dignity, truth, and what it meant to be a family, was still unfolding. And she was ready. The check sat untouched on the desk for nearly 2 days. Emily didn't rush to cash it. It wasn't about the money, not anymore. That certified slip of paper, though technically a resolution, didn't feel like victory. It felt more like an IOU that could never quite repair the damage that had been done. Cynthia's words echoed in the back of her mind. This matter is not over. But Emily knew better. In every legal sense, it was. The court had ruled. The trust clause had spoken. And Cynthia's decisions had buried whatever fragile sense of civility had remained between them. Still, Emily didn't relax. Halverson had warned her about post-ruling behavior, a polite legal phrase for what often turned into petty retaliation. Freezers mysteriously unplugged, property moved without notice, thinly veiled accusations of theft, missing mail. Nothing severe enough to pursue legally, but enough to make life miserable. So Emily became vigilant. She installed a lock on her bedroom door. She moved her father's important documents, the ones that hadn't been mishandled, into a secure box she kept in the trunk of her car. She backed up everything to the cloud. She didn't tell Cynthia about the steps she was taking, but she knew her stepmother noticed. The tension had become so thick that even the walls of the house seemed to absorb it. Then, 1 week after receiving the court-ordered payment, Emily got a call from Simon Halbert. His voice was surprisingly gentle. "Miss Whitmore, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, not at all. I assume this is about the painting?" "Yes," he replied. "I've been following the situation closely. I was not informed, at the time of purchase, that the item was part of an unsettled estate. Had I known, I would not have moved forward. I'm quite serious about acquisition ethics." "I understand," Emily said carefully. "I'm not looking to start a war." "Nor am I," he said, "which is why I wanted to let you know that I'm returning the painting to the gallery for reconsignment. I won't profit off of a piece that carries this kind of breach. You are, of course, within your right to buy it back, should you wish." She sat up straighter. "Buy back? I'll be donating the commission. You'll only need to pay the gallery's storage and handling fees." It wasn't a gift, but it was close. That afternoon, Emily drove to the Haverstock Gallery. The owner met her personally, a dignified woman named Lila Redding who expressed formal apologies on behalf of her staff and assured Emily that the piece had been kept in perfect condition. And there it was, on a tall easel in the back room, the painting. Her grandmother's painting. The muted seascape looked exactly as she remembered it, down to the small brush mark in the lower right corner that resembled a bird's wing. Emily paid £375 in gallery fees, signed a release form, and arranged to have the painting professionally created. She didn't want to bring it back to the house. Not now, not under Cynthia's roof. Instead, she called a friend who worked in archives at the university, and they agreed to store it for her in the interim, pending a more permanent solution. When she returned home that evening, Cynthia was in the living room, sipping wine and scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when Emily walked in. "Got your little toy back?" She muttered. "It's not a toy," Emily replied. "It was a part of my father's legacy. Something he left for me. You're just like your mother," Cynthia said coldly. "Always thinking everything's owed to you." Emily stopped. Her voice remained calm. "Nothing was owed to me, but what was given to me, I will protect." She walked past without waiting for a reply. By the end of the week, Emily had moved out. Probate was nearly finished, and she had no legal reason to remain in the house. She packed in silence, avoiding any emotional goodbyes. She didn't hug Cynthia. She didn't speak to Tyler. She left behind the keys and took only what had always belonged to her. And with that, the chapter of her life that had once included Sunday tea in the study, slow music drifting through the hallways, and her father's laugh, came to a close. Halverson contacted her one final time before the estate closed. He confirmed the transfer of the remaining trust assets, the clean audit confirming no further theft, and the final closing documents. Emily had asked him to include a clause, an official statement that in the event of future death or division of any remaining joint property, she waived any residual claim to Cynthia's estate. She wanted no further legal entanglement with that woman. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Absolutely." Some weeks later, Emily walked through the halls of the law school where she'd been accepted into a clerkship program. She was no longer the unsure student trying to balance grief and coursework. She had lived through something real, something bitter and instructive, and it had given her a strength that no textbook ever could. She placed a framed photograph of her father on her new desk next to a small print of the seascape painting. The original was still in storage, but she intended to hang it in her own home when she found one. Later that night, as she sat in her tiny rented apartment, she wrote a letter to her late father. She knew it wouldn't be sent, but it needed to be said. "Dear Dad, I did what you asked. I protected what mattered. I didn't let her take what was yours. I wish you could see it. The painting's still as beautiful as ever. I hope I honored you in all the ways you meant when you wrote those clauses. I understand now why you were so precise. I've learned to be precise too. Thank you for everything. Love, Em." She folded the letter, slid it into a book of his essays, and tucked it onto the shelf. She no longer needed revenge. What she had now was resolution. The painting had come back. The money had been returned. And Cynthia, once so confident in her control, had been humbled not by force, but by the one thing she underestimated, a daughter who read the fine print.